and welcome to TC World Conference, TECOM's second virtual-only conference. TECOM came up with an interesting program that touches all different aspects of technical communication, and in numbers, that means that, sorry, what's that? All right, in numbers, that means that there are more than 150 presentations within the next 5 days, and participants are joining us from all around the globe. So even though you may sit alone in front of your laptop like me right now, many fellow tech writers are joining our live session. Thank you all for joining and making this happen, and to give you the chance to interact with each other, TECOM has set up a chat room that will be opened after this session, and you're welcome to join a discussion with the other participants and speakers afterwards. You can access the chat via the event app, which you've just seen in the short video. The session you're about to enjoy now is called Your Brain Doesn't Like Complicated, Keep Your Graphics Simple, and is presented to you by Leonie Zaremba and Anton Bollen. My name is Dominik Strauss. I usually work at SAP in event management and communications for our user assistance community. And in the past years, I was lucky enough to be on the project team for one of TECOM's conferences, UI Reloaded. But for the next hour, I will be your moderator. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you to submit any questions that you may have during the presentation by typing them into the question section or Fragen, which you see in the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will take them at the end. Also, if you should have technical issues or cannot hear the speaker well, please let us know. Thankfully, there is a technical support team in the background, making sure that everything is running smoothly, so we hope there aren't any major issues to begin with. I've now got the pleasure to introduce two presenters whom I've known for quite a while, Leonie Zaremba from Parson AG and Anton Bollen from TechSmith. Not to brag, but you could say that I was their professional matchmaker because it was me who brought them together for a joint presentation at an SAP event 2 years ago. And what can I say? It's probably one of the best ideas I've had in my career. Why? Well, they both are brilliant speakers on their own, but just wait for their presentation and you'll see that together, they are hard to beat. But let me tell you a bit about Leonie and Anton now. Leonie has an academic background in technical communications, worked as a user assistance developer at SAP, which is where we met initially, and has recently started to work for Parson AG in Hamburg. In her role as technical writer, standardization concepts for a wide range of media types is one of her pet issues. And as you'll hear in today's presentation, she's done a lot of research on the relationship between text, images, and their perception. As for Anton, he's based in Berlin and works as customer and market strategist for TechSmith, closely liaising with TechSmith's European user base to better understand and support companies regarding all things video creation, image design, or other graphical content for documentation and training purposes. Today, I can't wait to hear about the latest findings from his eye tracking studies, which he conducted to better understand the users' minds. Having praised them so much now, I hope they deliver, but I don't really doubt that. Let us know what you think at the end of the session when the presenters will share a QR code for you to scan and give feedback. And with that, I'm happy you're here today, Leonie and Anton, so take it away.
Wow, thank you, Dominik, for this amazing introduction. And hi, everybody. I'm just shortly trying to figure out how to switch my slides, actually. Now we're there. Hi, everybody. My name is Leonie Zaremba, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this presentation. Your brain doesn't like complicated. Keep your graphics simple. In this first part of the presentation, I'm going to introduce you into some of the aspects of perception psychology and the cognitive processing that happens in your brain when you look at graphics. So we are very back to basics here, to be honest. And instead of just summarizing you the dry scientific facts, I want you to see, I want you to feel, and I want you to experience for yourself what happens in your brain when you look at certain visualizations. Therefore, I'm going to show you a lot of slides in a very ambitious time frame, but no worries, I already know that you can keep up with it. So let's just start right away. Let's speak about habits. We human beings, we love habits, and so does our brain. Our brain consumes so much energy in information processing that its default way to process information is to keep it as simple as possible. So to demonstrate this, I will show you 3 simplified graphics representing certain media types. And let's just see if you can quickly assume what is being visualized. I guess as soon as I say newspaper, the majority of us can actually agree on seeing a simplified newspaper here. So let's skip to the next one. It already looks more form-like and could represent a letter, right? And let's call this one a web-based video player, and a little teaser for the simplified user interface graphics Anton is going to present in this presentation. So those macro structures, you could identify them. Each time you look at something, your brain scans the pattern, and if it doesn't know it, it immediately starts comparing it to patterns you are already familiar with. But this can be culture specific. You have to know the rules. And to a certain point in your lifetime, you have seen a structure exactly like this. So putting all those influencing aspects aside, how could those macro structures we've just seen establish on such a broad scale? And they simply base on natural processes in your brain that are triggered when looking at visualizations. And ladies and gentlemen, I can promise this is where the fun part starts. Let's talk about the Gestalt Principles. The Gestalt Principles are also known as the Gestalt Laws, and they objectively and scientifically summarize, due to certain aspects, what happens in your brain when you look at visualizations. So let's see for yourself. Figure and ground. I assume everyone can see a white circle here. Easy, let's skip to the next one. So some of you may see the 2 faces first. Some of you may see the white candlestick first. But compared to the white circle, we only have a white candlestick on black background, correct? So distinguishing your foreground from the background is a natural process being triggered when looking at graphics. It works in colors, and it also works in several layers. So you can still distinguish the black cat in the foreground from its yellow background from the black slide background, correct? I will refer to that later. But depending on the complexity of your shape type, you might cause a delay in the cognitive processing of the visual information on the graphic. Keep that in mind. Let's talk about proximity. You know the white circle, let's just add some more, and maybe you are already asking for a meaning, but as I continue talking, you calm down and your brain has reached a point like there's no further information on this slide than just randomly placed white circles on black background. Now let's change it a bit. And instantly you perceive the additional information about having 3 groupings here, right? And this is how proximity works. Objects being close to each other are perceived as belonging together, building a unit, forming a group. Easy. Let's have a look at the next Gestalt principle. Symmetry. So we ourselves are built in symmetry to our vertical body axis. Easy. But symmetry, therefore, provides us a natural and great orientation. What does this have to do with graphics? Let's recap. We know those randomly placed circles, no further information processing, additional information about having groupings here. Now, let's align them. And already the same slide looks way clearer, but we can still improve it. Here we have all the objects aligned to each other, the groupings aligned to each other, and everything aligned to the whole slide. Therefore, we have implemented already the orientation our brain naturally starts to find when looking at a graphic for the first time. So way more capacity for cognitive processes for your brain. Let's talk about similarity. We know those randomly placed circles. Let's change it a bit, and something did just happen, right? And you don't really get used to it. Just something feels off about it. And what happens is your brain scans this slide, identifies the similarities, but wants to create meaningful relations. And this is exactly the pain point here. So I call it a friction point in your cognitive processing. But how can we improve it? How can we actually avoid it? Let's recap. We could place those similar objects near to each other and simply align them. Now breathe, relax. Everything is already implemented on the graphic itself, providing you good orientation and really distinguishing the similarities from each other. Have a look at before and after. Equally effective is anomaly, setting the focus onto a difference. Our beloved circles again, but as soon as something tiny changes, you spot this difference and you follow this difference. And yet we have reached another friction point. So the colored circles are still different from the white ones, easy, but this difference between those colors, your brain still tries to figure out why there is a difference. We don't have any additional information here on this slide. So if you just want to set the focus on the colored circles, one color is enough. Already seems more balanced, and you can actually take a deep breath and process other important information. Now, I promise no further friction points here. Connectivity. We know those circles. As soon as I switch slides, you perceive those objects as being one. And this is how connectivity works. And as you can see, this is very strong and way stronger than just working with proximity. Those objects are perceived as being directly connected, building one unit. And as this is so obvious, I suggest we get to the last Gestalt principle I want to show you. Closure. Remember the black cat? So I could almost bet that almost no one of you really thought about a missing line down there, right? So what happens? Your brain is naturally, and depending on the complexity of your shape type, without any efforts, fully capable of closing the gaps for you. Yes, this is a more advanced technique, but you can actually dare to leave something out and simply lighten your graphic. That was a lot, right? So now, with all those experience and what we've just seen, you might wonder, what can I do to keep my graphics simple? And I've prepared 3 rules of thumb for you, and I will just go through each point by point. First rule of thumb, reduce your content to its core message. And this might sound familiar from working with topic texts, and this is not a coincidence. It is exactly my point. Your graphic in technical documentation, it doesn't replace your text. It enriches it and it adapts to the core message. So keep that in mind. Focus on the essential. Avoid nested information on your graphics, and please step back from all the well-intentioned details. I know that you know, but your user might not. So focus on the core message. Next rule of thumb. Apply a visually consistent design. Now, the first technical writers may become nervous here, but it's easier than you really imagine it to be. What we need is a reduced set of rules that is sustainable, concise, and applicable to simple graphics. How? Well, you've just seen the Gestalt Principles. Make the Gestalt Principles your design principles. Meaning, when thinking about similarity, for example, really strong identifier on graphics, set rules for preferred shape type, reduce the color palette, have rules how to use colors. Thinking about figure and ground, set rules how to work with backgrounds and foregrounds, and maybe reduce the amount of layers to be used on your graphic, and so on. So, for example, also connectivity, have clear instructions how to use connections and in which cases, for example. So in the end, you will really have just a very compact set of rules, but it's applicable to all the simplified graphics throughout your whole documentation set. And once you've reached that point, stick to it, period. No further exceptions. Now, brings me to the last rule of thumb: level up your working environment. So your company might already offer corporate design. This will give you great hints how to really apply the visually consistent design for your simple graphics. Maybe there already is a style guide in your company. If not, create one. If there is one, try to figure out if you can still improve on the simple graphics topic. Most important, choose the right tool for the job. So you don't have to come along with the most complex graphic design software. You can keep it simple. Use the tool that best suits your needs. So, and at this point in the process, you or a colleague of yours dealing with this whole topic has become some sort of a subject matter expert, right? And from my personal experience, I can only recommend to install such a person for peer reviews, for quick tool refreshers, for a consulting hour maybe. But it really raises and keeps up the motivation in the whole team to have such a contact person in your team or near your team, and really simplifies this whole process of creating and implementing simple graphics into your documentation. So now you know the rule of thumbs. You are still hopefully amazed by the demos I've just shown you. I think I owe you one real-world example, as this was quite abstract. So Anton and I were recently writing an article for the German TCOM magazine, and we both have a strong software documentation background. So we thought, let's simplify some architecture diagrams, and we just started Googling for an original graphic to be simplified and found this one. So this is an original graphic from a Wikipedia page about software architecture, I guess, and it was already titled as simplified. But can we improve? So have a look at it. We see a lot of colors, we see a lot of different shape types, a lot of connections. But with all I've just said and what we've seen and experienced, and by speaking to no creators of this graphic, plainly looking at the visual information that is now on this graphic, we reached a simplified state like this. So what have we done? So first, we aligned it. Very strong technique to already make it more balanced. But all those strict horizontal, vertical lines for orientation, we also applied this to the connections. We kept the color code, but we harmonized the color palette that was used a bit just to make it a bit more calm. And we worked with backgrounds that can be titled, and for the color code, we also implemented a legend in case there is a need for further information. So have a look at before and after. So trying to create simple graphics doesn't necessarily mean to avoid complex. As you can see here, this graphic still is complex. But certainly the first impression keeps up the motivation to further deep dive into this graphic and get familiar with the topic. Furthermore, Anton and I really want to discuss this graphic with the creators, so stay tuned. Maybe we can even simplify this more and really have a look at this whole thing of simplified graphics or simple graphics as being a process. So maybe we end up with a more simplified graphic on Wikipedia. And with this being said, there's still one more thing to go. That's it from my side, and thank you very much. Please welcome Anton Bollen, my dear co-presenter, who is now going to introduce you into the whole topic of simplified screenshots. Another great example for this invisible force of your very own perception. Is this working?
I believe it is. Do you see my
I
screen?
can hear you.
Yes, alles gut?
Yep.
Super, yeah. So, thank you and hi again. My name is Anton. It's great to be here for the second half of this presentation. And thank you to Leonie for giving us such a great introduction into the Gestalt principles. So I must admit, a lot of this was really new to me until I met Leonie a couple of years ago. You know, like I've always worked with images, but I never really thought about the way we perceive them in our subconscious and the way our users must be perceiving them. But having gone through that visual experience with Leonie, like we all just did, makes it very clear, and I think it gives us a lot to think about. And I think I speak for a lot of content creators when I do say, let's design simpler graphics that incorporate these principles to better guide the user. Okay, I want to talk with you about screenshots because I love screenshots. After all, I do work for Snagit. It kind of comes with the territory, and I take a lot of screenshots, a couple hundred, maybe even up to 1,000 a year. And here's a screenshot I took very recently. It's showing my Outlook calendar. And the instructions in this particular case are to select the note from that drop down in the top left. So far, so good. However, the screenshot contains a lot of visual noise, and visual noise are all the elements in the screenshot that don't relate to the core instructions, yet are drawing the attention of the viewer to them. In other words, it's like everything that is distracting. For example, our eyes seem to be drawn to that pixelated area on the left, or the calendar is also competing for the viewer's attention. It might not really matter what appointments I had back in April, but a viewer will look nonetheless, just like all of you are looking probably right now. And there's a lot more visual noise in this screenshot. And my main point being is that all these distractions make it really hard for the user to process the screenshot and to focus on what really matters, that drop-down menu on the top left with the careful selected instructions. So let me try to visualize this problem with screenshots for you. And for this, I want to introduce you to something called predictive eye tracking. Yeah, I assume most of you are familiar with normal old school eye tracking, in which a user or a group of users are placed in front of a camera and their eye movements are analyzed to see where in a website, product, or software they are looking. This technique is used a lot in marketing research and usability testing. However, with predictive eye tracking, it's a bit different because you no longer need that group of people to test on. Instead, you can generate eye tracking heat maps by applying eye tracking algorithms to existing images. Yeah, and there are several web services that out there that allow you to create these heat maps, and the algorithms are based on machine learning. That means that they have been feeding the results of thousands of eye tracking tests to these artificial intelligence computers, and as a result, they can generate heat maps that are incredibly accurate. And the service that I've been using is called Expose.io. You can see it in the bottom left right here. I have no affiliation with it, but I just love the simplicity of it. I can upload an image or a screenshot, and within seconds, it will return me the screenshot with a heat map overlaid on it that will show me where the attention and the focus of the viewer will fall. And what I love absolutely most about it is that this previously rather exclusive technology of eye tracking that was really, exclusive to high-level marketing people has all of a sudden become available to us technical communicators so we can start analyzing and learning from our content. All right, so let's go back to that basic screenshot of my calendar. Yeah, and here it is with its heat map, its eye tracking map applied to it. Yeah, the yellowish greenish areas are the ones where the user will be looking. And just as a tip, if you squint a little bit, these highlighted areas become even more clear. So you can already see where the attention is falling and maybe where it's not. And the good news is that the user does focus on that drop-down menu on the left side very clearly, but we can also see all that visual noise, right? The pixelated area on the bottom left, the calendar, there's a lot of attention falling onto them. And in many ways, this heat map confirms what I was saying earlier. So what can we do after we drink a sip of water? we can do one of the first simple solution, and that is to crop the screenshot. Right? This already cuts out a lot of that visual and competing noise and all those unnecessary elements. Everything that's currently like kind of highlighted in this like whitish color would or could potentially be removed. And additionally, we can draw a red frame or red box around the desired option within the drop-down menu. And you know, none of this is new. Cropping and annotations are techniques that technical communicators have been using for years, and I'm sure a lot of you are also doing that on a daily basis. But it's a good practice to keep going. And these simple things, they really, really work, right? I mean, take a look at this screenshot now. The drop-down menu is now very central and very noticeable. And I would say we've created a simpler yet better screenshot. And the eye tracking heat map confirms exactly that this screenshot now is quite effective. We can see that a lot of the viewer's focus falls where it needs to fall on that drop-down menu, but we can also see that there's a few areas left that still cause some cognitive trouble. Yeah. So what can we do to further simplify this screenshot? Well, let me ask you, have you seen this visual style before? Or maybe you've heard me talk about it before. I'm talking about the simplified, almost abstract graphics, and I've been seeing them all over the place. They're being used in a lot of marketing content, user onboarding content, but they're also being used in technical documentation content, like this example from the Google Help file. And it is worth noting in this particular example that the same graphics, the same images are being used in the English, the Japanese, and the German version of that same help article. And that's pretty neat. What I'm talking about here is called Simplified User Interface, or short SUI. And this design style is a representation of a user interface that strips away contextually unimportant elements or replaces them with basic shapes. So SUI reduces the cognitive load that we have when we process images, and it helps us to focus on the essentials. And one important factor here is that the software must remain recognizable to the user. Those macro structures that Leonie was talking about earlier. And so take a look at these graphics. And even though they are simplified representation of an actual user interface, I'm pretty sure that every single one of you in the audience was able to recognize that these are the Finder and Explorer windows under Mac and PC. We can recognize them because we are familiar with them. Again, macro structures, and we don't need the original to necessarily make this work. SUI graphics offer us technical communicators a lot of benefits, and I'm going to touch on them very briefly. Right? First, they allow us to really leverage a modern and comprehensible design. This stuff looks good. Further, these graphics are often less prone to being outdated when small UI changes do occur. So as a result, our graphics have a chance of being future-proofed, or at least we can extend their shelf life so we don't have to update them as often and as regularly. Further, the SUI graphics are often easier to localize because they contain no or very little text, and that allows them to be also reused in multiple language versions of that same content, as we saw with that Google example just a few minutes ago. And last but absolutely certainly not least, right, these SUI graphics actively reduce the visual noise and helps us focus the viewer's attention. And I think that is the most compelling benefit of them all, right? Getting the user to look where they need to be looking. So here's another screenshot, and I think the instructions are quite clear, right? We have to click on File, Connect Mobile Device. And let's compare that to the SUI version. Yeah, you can see, I'm going to use my mouse real quick. I hope that shows up. So you can see that most of the drop-down menu options have been replaced by these gray boxes. And there's also other parts of the screenshot that I removed. The secondary menu options along the top of the screenshot, as well as all those hotkeys that were not relevant to the core instructions. And the only thing that really remains visible in that SUI screenshot are select file, connect mobile device. The screenshot it's just so clean and in a lot of ways really easy for our brain to process because there's just less information and our brain is very easily able to identify the information that really matters. Okay, And once again, let's take a look at it through that eye tracking heat map lens. And in the normal screenshot on the left, it's very clear that the user has to scan almost all menu options top to down. They also pay attention to the listed hotkeys before they can really settle on the instructions that they need to follow, click mobile device. And now, we can see all that visual noise. And now let's compare that to the heat map of the SUI screenshot. Bam. Well, I think the result speaks for itself, right? I don't think I need to explain the difference any further. But let me go back to my calendar, right? This example from a little bit ago. Remember, this is already a good screenshot. We annotated it, we cropped it. It's pretty decent, but I want to see what else we can do with it. So, of course, let's apply some SUI treatment to it. Here we go. Looking good, right? Most of it has been simplified. However, I do want to point out that I left a couple areas of the screen purposely exposed to provide some context and guidance to the user. So first, the actual node, the call to action, is clear and visible because we need the user to know where he or she may or may not be clicking. Further, I left the home tab purposely exposed so the user knows which tab they are in, and many of the product icons I also left because I feel like they provide a lot of visual anchor points and guidance around the software without being too distracting from the core message. Okay, and let's heat map it. And we can see that this version of is very, very effective at directing the focus of the viewer where the focus needs to be on that node option. Let's compare it one more time. Here on the left side, we have the SUI screenshot, and on the right, we have the normal version of that very same screenshot. This is pretty fascinating, isn't it? Like, I'm having so much fun looking at these graphics and creating these graphics because there's just so much we can learn and think about. Okay, I think at this point, I want to take a look at a couple of real-world examples together. And the first one I'm bringing up is called Pix.io. It's an image management software from, I believe, Bavaria. And they created the following SUI animation. As you're taking a look at it, please notice that most of the animation has been effectively simplified. However, the key elements related to that licensing options that you can set have been left clear and in the original. They are focusing on what matters most, and they're focusing on the core message. It is also worth noting that Pix.io used several visual anchor points. And those visual anchor points are elements in the animation that the user can use to relate to and guide them. And what I'm mostly talking about is, for example, the blue P icon in the top left. So the user knows what application they're in. Then we have the actual tab highlighted with a little bit of blue, so the user knows that they're in the first tab. And last but not least, the big blue search button right here on the right side is very identifiable, and it occurs in the original software. And all of these anchor points essentially help the user process that simplified graphic and relate that information to the actual software on the left. Here's another example that I absolutely love, and this one is from Adobe, and it's from Adobe Illustrator. And they created these 3 little animations that you can see in the top right to describe their Puppet Warp tool. And these graphics and animations, they're just beautiful and simple. And what I really love about them is, the extreme level of simplicity that's going on. I mean, take a look at them. They reduce the graphics down to the bare minimum of necessary UI elements. They're only showing one tool in the toolbar. However, and yet the instructions are clear as day. Let's take a look at this top 3 little animations one more time, right? In the first one, you must select the object on your canvas. Okay, that's pretty clear. Then you must select the new Puppet Warp tool, which looks like that little pin, and you set a couple of pinpoints. Also incredibly clear. And then as a third step, you can manipulate your object using those pins that you placed in the previous step. So all in all, I receive all the information I need to know in order to edit that series or to edit an object in using the Puppet Warp tool. However, the graphics and the animations don't provide unnecessary or distracting animation, content. And as a further bonus, the graphics that Adobe used, they were designed entirely without text. The text is in the help file above and below, but not in the graphic itself. And that allows Adobe to use that same graphic in all language versions of that same help file article. And that's, again, a huge benefit for us technical communicators. All right, let's do one last example. Yeah, there's always one more. And this is a screenshot a user sent me last year. His name is Robert, and Robert works for a company called Esri, and they make ArcGIS Pro, which is a mapping software. And Robert has to document this software. And Robert acknowledges that the software is incredibly complicated and complex, which it really is. Just look at that, right? There's so much going on. And he was looking for ideas for simplifying that screenshot. And yeah, in this particular case, the user instructions are as highlighted in red. Click on Explore in the top left, and then select the geography type from the drop-down menu on the right. So far, so good. So what can we do? The first thing I notice with this screenshot is that big map in the middle. I mean, it's central, it's colorful, it's beautiful, and it's really distracting, isn't it? And most importantly, in this particular case, the map only serves as an example. It has no real value. It's demo content. And because of that, it really shouldn't take up such a dominant visual part of our screenshot. Wouldn't you agree? So maybe there's a way we can change that. And fortunately for Robert, there is an easy way, because his mapping software actually supports a different, simpler map mode. He just has to hit this little switch. And once enabled, the map is shown like this. It already has a reduced color palette and a much simpler design. And the whole thing seems like lighter, softer, it blends well with the rest of the application. And most importantly, our attention is no longer drawn to it. And that is perfect for this type of example content. But maybe we can take it a step further, right? I like this already, but maybe there's more, because I also noticed that because of the complexity of the software, there's a lot of icons in the top, and there's a lot of extra elements on the bottom and on the right that may or may not actually be needed. And I always ask myself, can we reduce the screenshot's complexity even further by taking some of that extra stuff out without hurting the core instructions of, selecting the geography type? Well, let us try this. So here, what do you think? Before, with all the icons and exposed, and after, a little bit more cleaned up, it's simpler, and I would argue it's better, or at least much less complex. And all of these techniques of cropping, annotating, moving things, reducing things are techniques that help us technical communicators create simpler screenshots. And maybe, just maybe, Robert can even, make use of some SUI for these graphics. Okay, with everything that we just said, Leonie and I, there's really one thing that we both really want you to understand, and that is your brain doesn't like complicated.
Keep your graphics simple.
Exactly, keep your graphics simple. And with that note, thank you all for attending and listening to our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And I believe now we're open for some questions.
Right. First of all, let me thank you, Leonie and Anton, for your presentation. I hope I didn't promise too much in my introductions. Personally, I think you've done a splendid job as usual, so thanks again very much. We're now going to begin answering the questions that were submitted during the presentation right now. It's not too late. If you do have questions, do type them in and we'll get to them because we've got bit of time to answer them. So the first question, let me just move over the questions part, would be, do you see differences, for example, between manufacturing and software help regarding the screenshots?
Yes and no. I think, of course, the screenshots or the graphics in general are different because we're dealing with a different type of content that needs to be explained. And you always have to think about the user and some of their requirements on what that screenshot might require or what is expected of it. However, with all kinds of graphics, doesn't matter if it's screenshots or if it's more like 3D drawings or the likes, keeping them simple is, in my opinion, incredibly helpful. And one example I like to bring up is it's less manufacturing, but think about the IKEA instructions. They are breaking down complicated manufacturing and assembly processes and represent them through very simple graphics and visuals. And they're incredibly effective at taking this complex information and making it accessible to your general user. And so I think we can relate, or we can take from that whether or not you're working in manufacturing or for a real software company like I am, or you're documenting something completely else. Thriving towards simpler graphics is something that will just help the user process the information. And at that point, it really doesn't matter if you're talking about like software or manufacturing, right? Simpler information is, in my opinion, better information. How do you see it, Leonie?
Basically the same, yeah. Keep it
Okay.
simple and really improve the user experience, and this is independent from manufacturing or software.
Brilliant. Questions are coming in, that's good, and there are a couple regarding tools. I know it's not a tool presentation, Anton, but people are wondering what tools they can use to simplify their graphics, whether there are tools that automatically blur out text, etc. So maybe you can just mention what you used.
So in Germany, you would call that eine Vorlage, right? So there are many tools that you can use to create simplified graphics. And my primary advice would be work with what you already have, because that's the tool you're familiar with and you probably are good at working at. And I know people who use PowerPoint quite extensively for creating these graphics. People use things like Adobe Illustrator in GIMP. Or from our company, we do make Snagit, and we actually have an auto simplification feature built in that allows you to turn your screen into one of those simplified graphics. So if that interests you, I do have a couple tool presentations on that topic this week, or you can stop by the TechSmith booth. But nevertheless, if you already have other image editing tools, you can very easily create simplified graphics using them as well. Yeah, there's not one perfect tool, but rather the best tool for what you need to accomplish.
Good answer, thank you. Then people would like to get the website address of the Expose IO software. Maybe if you could enter that in the chat, or later on in the event app in the chat, make that available. That's asked. And then translation came up. It's rather a comment stressing what you also said, that it's brilliant that you can use your one screenshot if it's very simple in different languages, so that's good. And then there's one, do you have any hints on how to economically implement SUI? So far it seems too much more work than simply taking screenshots using Snagit or any other snipping tools. Is there a way to do that economically?
Yeah. So the economic response is that SUI is not for everything in all cases, but rather it's a strategy or a tactic you can use selectively in situations where the payoff is, or the challenge is incredibly hard. So if, for example, the onboarding to your product is very, very important, which it should be. However, you're noticing that that's where users are struggling. Maybe this is where you invest some extra time to create the SUI graphics, because you know the benefit you're gaining outweighs the additional cost. I would not necessarily say simplify every single screenshot that you have, but rather pick the ones where you feel like you'll get the most return on the investment. Another area is when you're thinking about the localization stuff. Yeah, how much it might make more time to create that initial SUI graphic, but how much time and effort and money are you maybe saving in the long run when you don't have to localize it as often, or you can reuse it across multiple language versions? So think a little bit about your upfront cost, but also the long time return you're getting on it. And yeah, and I think a lot of ways finding that balance between using normal screenshots for visual communication and when to use more SUI screenshots. Yeah, it's about finding that balance rather than say doing one or the other all the way.
Cool. One more general question is, any suggestions for getting a colleague who is addicted to complicated graphics to shift their approach?
Well, demonstrate it. I mean, as I've already said, those well-intentioned details, try to step back from them. So if you have to convince a colleague, I mean, really present your target group and why this information has to be simplified. So the understanding on the other side is way better. Anyways, it can be the case, for example, very complex information architecture or software architectures, and you really need each and every detail of this information because this graphic serves as some sort of point they return to for reference. Then, of course, there are established information models such as UML diagrams or TAM diagrams, and then use it if it's appropriate for the target group. You really don't have to lead this discussion and every time when it's about how to simplify the graphics. So really make this depending on your target group. If you want to serve complex information, really use established information models for it. But you might observe people defending all the details on their graphics, that they nevertheless also try to simplify them. And this is basically your point to step in and say, hey, you already tried to simplify it. So my suggestion is to take it even a step further and really benefit from this very plain, clear, and neat look.
Very good. And I think the last question, there are a couple of nice comments about the presentation. It was very well received, so well done again. And the last question coming in was, other than the heat maps, have you done any usability testing of screenshots or asked users about how they perceive a complicated screenshot, a screenshot with some of the distraction removed, or a SUI with lots of detail removed?
We have done some testing with our users, and there are mixed results. There are some people who really prefer old school original screenshots. Some people are really tied to having every detail visible. But overall, the perception has been very positive. People are open to this concept, especially now that it's being found in so much general content that is out there in the marketing onboarding content. People are used to the style, so they can work with it. In terms of actually effectiveness testing, can they process the information faster and more accurately? We have not done that per se, but I know there's a lot of research out there that supports the value of visuals, that people are able to perform instructions or follow instructions better when they are supported by visuals as opposed to just having text. And I would imagine, as a level up from that, having that visual information simplified in order to support what is written in the text, which is also what Leonie was saying earlier. I think it should give us the necessary benefits and outcomes for the user. But yeah, additional testing is not something I per se have done or have current data on, unfortunately. Maybe next year.
Looking forward to that. And there has a new comment or question has been submitted, so I'll briefly mention that as well. I'm not colorblind myself, it says, but I have wondered whether color usage would be a problem for such people. Do you have any suggestions about that?
Well, it depends. So I already recommended, if you have this very compact set of rules, to also implement something saying like reducing the color palette to be used. So ideally, you just work with 2 accent colors to be used, attracting a focus. And yes, of course, then keep in mind your target group. Maybe some of them are colorblind. So choose your accents with care if possible. So in some way, companies might have red as an accent color or even green as an accent color. And it still fits into this whole corporate design thing and will also, for the people being colorblind, kind of a repeating pattern. That's quite unfortunate, but it works. But keep it in mind, yeah, also accessibility and such things. So we are not done here.
Yeah.
We're just the basic Gestalt principles, giving you a very good explanation when to call a graphic simple. So the choose of colors could be a presentation for itself.
I know this is just the beginning for all of us, right? We all have to start thinking about how can we keep our graphics simpler, and yeah, the points of accessibility and contrast and color blindness are also things we need to incorporate in those style guides and when we try to come up with some sort of rules and systems for these graphics.
Cool. I think you've answered all the questions. If I missed one, please forgive me. But that's a nice segue into the event app and the chat that's available. Leonie will attend the chat, and Anton tries to make it possible himself. So if you've got further questions for Leonie or Anton, do join the chat right after the session closes, and yeah, keep the conversation going on that topic.
And also feel free to contact us via mail. So if it doesn't fit into your schedule now.
Yeah, you do have the contact information displayed right now. Also, the recording and the slides will be available afterwards. So you do have all the contact details and do get in touch. Right. I think with that, I can say that I hope that you enjoyed the session. It's not too late to register for more sessions of the TC World Conference program. As I just mentioned, the recordings will be available for 3 months and can be accessed via the dashboard in the conference tool. So yeah, thanks again, Leonie and Anton, and thank you everyone for attending TC World Conference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.